Daniel had never imagined that one small mistake could change the course of his entire life. He was an engineer, not a soldier, not an adventurer, and certainly not a diplomat. His days had always been filled with wires, circuits, and tools, not with strange worlds or alien rulers. But fate has a way of taking ordinary people and placing them in extraordinary situations. That was exactly what happened to him when his ship malfunctioned in deep space. The problem started with a minor error in the navigation system. At first it seemed harmless, just a blinking light on the control panel. Daniel tried to fix it, as he always did, calmly and carefully. But the problem grew faster than he could manage. The engines sputtered, the alarm screamed, and before he could reroute the system, his ship had veered off course. He crash-landed on a planet whose name he did not even know. The surface was strange, vast stretches of silver sand, tall, crystal-like, trees that shone in the sunlight, and skies that shifted colors every few hours. His first instinct was survival. He gathered what he could from the wreck and searched for food, water, and shelter. The air was breathable, but heavy, and the ground seemed to hum faintly, almost alive. He walked cautiously, knowing that danger might be hidden behind every rock or shadow. But instead of danger, he stumbled into something far more unexpected. After hours of wandering, Daniel saw lights in the distance. At first, he thought it might be another crashed ship or some human settlement, but as he got closer, the shapes and patterns were unlike anything human hands had built. Towers carved from stone rose high into the air, decorated with flowing banners and symbols he could not read. Strange figures moved gracefully among the lights, tall and elegant, their forms shimmering slightly under the glow of fire and crystal. His heart pounded in his chest. He had heard stories of alien civilizations, but he had never seen one with his own eyes. Daniel told himself to stay quiet, to observe from a distance. He crouched behind one of the crystal trees and tried to figure out what was happening. Music echoed in the air, soft, deep sounds, accompanied by rhythmic beats. It seemed like a ceremony or a gathering of great importance. Curious despite his fear, he took a step closer and then another, until the crowd came fully into view. At the center of a grand hall stood a figure unlike all the others. She was taller, her presence commanding, and her clothing shimmered as if woven from starlight itself. A crown of silver rested upon her head, and her eyes glowed faintly with an inner fire. Even without understanding their language or culture, Daniel knew instantly who she was. She was their leader, their ruler, the alien queen. The hall was filled with her advisors and warriors, each one standing with a mixture of discipline and reverence. The queen moved with a grace that seemed beyond human understanding, and yet, when she turned, her gaze was sharp and searching. Daniel froze, realizing too late that he had stepped out from behind his cover. Her eyes found him, piercing through the crowd and settling directly on him. For a moment, the entire hall fell, silent. Daniel's mind raced. He thought of running back into the shadows, of pretending he had never been there, but his legs refused to move. He felt small, exposed, and completely unprepared for whatever was about to happen. The queen lifted her hand slowly, and the entire court seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a clear and steady voice, she spoke words that echoed across the chamber. "This is my husband." The words struck Daniel like a thunderbolt. His jaw dropped, and his heart felt as if it might burst from his chest. Around the hall, the aliens reacted with shock. Some gasped, some whispered to each other in confusion, and others stared at him with disbelief. Daniel himself could barely process what had been said. Husband? He? To her? He wanted to speak, to protest, to explain that he was just an engineer from Earth, stranded and lost. But the moment held him still. The queen's gaze remained firm, unwavering, as if she had spoken a truth that could not be undone. Daniel felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room pressing against him. The crowd shifted uneasily. Daniel could hear the faint murmurs, rising. He could not understand their language fully, but he understood the tone, confusion, suspicion, and even anger. The queen, however, did not waver. She stood tall, her expression calm and unshaken, as if daring anyone to challenge her, Declaration. Daniel's mind spun with questions. Why had she chosen him? Did she mistake him for someone else? Was this part of some ritual he did not understand? Or had she simply made a decision that would now bind his fate forever? He searched for an answer in her face, but her expression revealed nothing more than quiet certainty. As the hall buzzed with whispers, Daniel's heart raced faster. He had entered this world as a lost traveler, but in the span of moments, he had been placed into a role he neither asked for nor understood. He wondered if it was a trap, if she had chosen him to protect him from the wrath of her. The moment after the Queen's announcement passed like a storm. The hall, which had been filled with whispers and surprise, slowly began to move again. Advisors leaned toward each other, their voices low and urgent. Warriors shifted in their places, their sharp eyes fixed on Daniel, watching his every move. He stood frozen, not knowing whether to bow, speak, or run. His mind screamed at him to say something, to explain that he was just a lost engineer from a faraway world, but the weight of the Queen's words silenced him. When the gathering ended, the Queen gestured for him to follow. Her stride was steady, graceful, and filled with authority. Daniel hesitated, but the alternative, staying alone among the sharp-eyed warriors, seemed worse. He trailed behind her through long stone corridors lit by glowing crystals. The walls were covered in markings and patterns that seemed alive, shifting faintly like they held memories of the past. Each step he took echoed loudly, reminding him how out of place he was. The Queen finally stopped in a chamber that overlooked the city. From there, Daniel could see more of the alien world spread out below. Tall structures carved from stone, walkways winding between towers, and creatures he had never imagined walking calmly among the people. The Queen turned, her face calm but unreadable. "You wonder why I said what I said?" she began in a voice that carried both strength and quietness. Her words were in her own language, but somehow he understood. He nodded quickly, his throat dry. I don't understand," Daniel admitted. "Why me? I don't even belong here. I'm not a warrior or a leader. I don't even know your world." The Queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes like twin suns burning with thought. "Sometimes," she said, "the right choice does not come from knowledge. It comes from instinct." Her words didn't ease him. If anything, they raised more questions. Daniel wanted to press her, but before he could, the sound of footsteps filled the chamber. A group of advisors entered, tall and serious, their faces stern. They bowed to the Queen but ignored Daniel completely, as if he were nothing more than air. Then one of them spoke in a deep, sharp voice. "Your Majesty, this cannot stand. A stranger, one not of our kind, cannot simply be named as your partner. It will bring unrest among the people." Another nodded. "The court whispers already. They wonder if you have been touched by madness. To claim him as your husband without counsel is dangerous." Daniel's stomach tightened. He understood only some of their words, but the tone was clear. They didn't trust him, and they didn't approve of her decision. He glanced at the Queen nervously, wondering if she would take back her declaration, but she stood tall, her presence unshaken. "My word is final," she replied firmly. "He is under my protection." The advisors exchanged glances, some frowning, others whispering to each other. Daniel felt their eyes on him, heavy and cold. He realized that while the Queen's choice had saved him from immediate danger, it had also placed him in the center of something far bigger. He was no longer just a lost traveler. He was now part of a struggle he didn't understand. After the advisors left, Daniel let out a shaky breath. "They don't like me," he said softly. "They don't know you," the Queen corrected. "They see only a human who appeared from the sky. Fear makes them speak as they do." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "And what about you? Why? Aren't you afraid?" The Queen's expression softened, though only slightly. "Because fear blinds, I choose to see." Her words lingered in his mind long after he was escorted to a small chamber prepared for him. The room was simple but comfortable, with soft bedding, a basin of water, and food that looked strange but smelled edible. Yet Daniel found no peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the suspicious faces of the advisors, the whispers of the court, the way the Queen's voice cut through the noise with certainty. Days passed, but the atmosphere didn't grow any lighter. Whenever Daniel walked through the palace corridors, he felt the stares. Some were curious, others cold, and a few openly hostile. He heard murmurs in the alien language, words he couldn't fully translate but understood well enough. Outsider, intruder, pretender. Despite the unease, Daniel couldn't ignore a strange sense of safety that surrounded him whenever the Queen was near. She spoke little, but her presence carried a strength that kept even the boldest critics quiet. Yet Daniel also knew that this peace was fragile. He had become a piece in a game he didn't know the rules of, and sooner or later someone would test whether he truly belonged. One evening, while the sky outside burned with colors of violet and gold, Daniel found himself standing on a balcony, looking out over the alien city. He thought of Earth, of the small workshop where he used to spend his days, of the hum of machines and the comfort of routine. Now, he stood in a palace, claimed as the husband of a queen he had only just met. The distance between his old life and his new one felt impossible to measure. As he leaned on the stone railing, he heard footsteps behind him. The Queen appeared, silent as ever, her gaze fixed on the horizon. For a while, neither spoke. Then, Daniel finally asked the question that had haunted him since that first moment. Why me? The Queen didn't answer immediately. She watched the horizon as if searching for something far beyond sight. Because sometimes the stars send what we need, not what we expect, she said quietly. Daniel turned to face her, his heart uneasy but curious. He still didn't understand her, but something in her voice told him that her choice had a purpose. What that purpose was, he didn't know yet, but he sensed that the whispers in the court, the restless advisors, and the weight of the Queen's decision were only the beginning. And though fear still pressed against him, a small spark of determination began to grow inside. Whatever this world demanded of him, he would have to face it. The days that followed were heavy with tension. Daniel walked through the palace like a shadow that didn't belong, watched from every corner and judged by whispers he could not fully understand. The Queen's people respected her authority, but their suspicion toward him grew stronger with every passing hour. He could feel it in their eyes, sharp and unwelcoming. Yet whenever he stood beside her, no one dared to question him directly. It was her presence that shielded him. Without her, he knew he would have been cast out, or worse. Daniel wanted answers, and slowly the Queen began to give them. One evening, when the palace was quiet and the city lights flickered like stars below, she invited him into her private chamber. The room was different from the rest of the palace, less formal, almost gentle. The walls were decorated with patterns of flowing lines that glowed faintly, as if telling a story only she understood. A soft breeze drifted in through tall windows, carrying the scent of blossoms from a garden far below. "You deserve to know why I chose you," the Queen said at last, her voice steady but softer than before. Daniel sat across from her, his hands resting nervously on his knees. He had been waiting for this moment. She spoke of an ancient prophecy, words passed down through her people for generations. It told of a time when unrest would rise across their world, when rivals would challenge the throne, and when the balance of peace would tremble. In that time, a stranger from the stars would appear, someone not of their kind, who would stand beside the ruler and guide their people through the storm. "You arrived," she said simply, her eyes locked on his. "Not by chance, by destiny." Daniel felt a chill run through him. He shook his head slowly. "I'm no prophecy. I'm just an engineer. I fix machines, I patch circuits, I don't lead worlds." The Queen didn't flinch. "The prophecy does not speak of titles. It speaks of presence, of courage, of change." Her words sank into him like stones in water. Daniel wanted to argue, to insist that she was wrong, that she had mistaken him for someone else. But deep inside, a part of him wondered if his arrival truly was more than an accident. Could fate really have chosen him? Or was this all just the Queen's way of protecting him from her suspicious court? He thought back to that first moment in the hall when she had declared him her husband. If she hadn't done that, what would have happened? Would the warriors have struck him down as an intruder? Would he have been locked away, studied, or executed? Her sudden choice might have been the only reason he was still alive. Still, doubt weighed heavily on him. "Your people don't trust me," Daniel said quietly. "They see me as a problem, not a solution. Maybe your advisors are right. Maybe I don't belong here." The Queen leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp. "Do you believe that?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to admit that he longed for the familiar hum of machines on Earth, for the safety of the life he once knew. But another part of him, the part that had survived the crash, walked alone across alien sands and stood in the face of suspicion, kept him silent. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. The Queen continued. "When I saw you, I felt the truth of the prophecy. I knew I had to act before anyone could question your presence. If I had not spoken, you would have been taken away. My court does not forgive strangers easily. By naming you, I gave you protection. And by protecting you, I gave my people a choice, to see you not as a threat, but as someone meant to be here." Daniel realized then that her bold declaration had been more than instinct. It had been strategy. In one moment, she had turned him from an intruder into someone tied directly to her. It was the only way to shield him from suspicion. But that choice had come with a price. Now the court's unrest was heavier than ever. In the following days, Daniel began to notice the Queen's advisors growing bolder in their opposition. They spoke in sharp tones during meetings, their eyes darting toward him with distrust. Some warned that the prophecy was being twisted, that he was no savior but a danger to the throne. Others whispered that his presence would invite rebellion. The Queen listened calmly, never raising her voice, but Daniel could see the strain in her eyes. Despite the tension, she continued to involve him in her daily life. She showed him the palace gardens, where plants glowed with soft light. She took him to the high balconies, where he could see the endless horizon of her world. She even allowed him to watch council meetings, though most of the advisors scowled at his presence. Through it all, Daniel began to see more of who she was. Not just a queen, but a leader burdened with responsibility, carrying the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. And slowly, something began to change in Daniel as well. At first, he had seen himself only as a stranger trapped in a dangerous situation. But the more he learned about the Queen and her people, the more he realized that his role might be larger than he thought. Maybe he couldn't dismiss the prophecy so easily. Still, the danger was real. Each day, the court's hostility grew sharper. The Queen's advisors whispered of challenges to her rule, of rivals waiting for the right moment to strike. Daniel knew that if he failed to prove himself, her choice would become a weakness others would exploit. One night, as Daniel walked through the quiet halls, he overheard two guards speaking in hushed tones. They spoke of unrest outside the palace, of whispers among the people that their queen had lost her way. "She chose an outsider," one said bitterly. "How can he ever be one of us?" Daniel stopped in the shadows, the words cutting deep. He wanted to turn away, but he stood frozen, realizing the truth. The Queen's bold declaration had saved his life, but it had also placed her under fire. Her faith in him was now being tested by everyone around her. When he returned to his chamber, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the Queen's words echoing in his mind. "Sometimes the stars send what we need, not what we expect." He didn't know if he believed in destiny, but he knew one thing for certain. If the Queen had risked her crown for him, then he couldn't remain passive. Whether he was meant to be here or not, he would have to find a way to prove that her choice was not a mistake. The court could only tolerate Daniel's presence for so long before their frustration spilled over. The whispers that once stayed hidden in corners of the palace grew louder and sharper. The advisors, who had bowed reluctantly to the Queen's authority, began to press her with challenges. They demanded proof that this human truly belonged at her side. Without it, they warned, unrest among the people would spread like fire. The Queen did not flinch at their demands, but Daniel felt the weight of them pressing on him. He knew he was no warrior, no prophet, no king. He was only an engineer who had fallen from the sky by accident. Yet, the more he thought about it, the more he realized he could not simply remain under the Queen's protection. If he wanted her, people to accept him, he would have to earn it. The council declared a trial. They named it not as punishment but as proof, a way to show whether the Queen's choice carried truth or folly. The trial would not be fought with swords alone. It would test courage, wit, and resourcefulness, qualities the prophecy hinted at. The Queen accepted, her expression unreadable, though Daniel saw a flicker of concern in her eyes when she glanced his way. On the day of the trial, the palace courtyard was filled with people. Citizens gathered in silence, their gazes fixed on the foreigner who stood among their own. The sky shifted colors as it often did, turning from pale blue to streaks of gold and crimson, casting a dramatic glow over the scene. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced his breathing, steady. He reminded himself of every problem he had ever solved, every broken machine he had mended with patience and skill. The first challenge tested his courage. He was led into a chamber where the walls moved like living stone, closing in slowly, threatening to trap him. Panic clawed at him, but Daniel remembered the mechanics of pressure and release. He searched the walls with his hands, feeling for weak points. His fingers found a hidden mechanism, and with steady effort he forced it open. The walls froze, then retreated, leaving the crowd murmuring in surprise. He had not fought with strength, but with calm observation. The second challenge tested his mind. He was placed before a complex device built by the aliens long ago, its parts twisted and broken, its function unknown. The advisors expected him to fail, for even their brightest minds had struggled with it. But Daniel saw not an alien relic, but a puzzle. He studied the gears, the wires, the flow of energy that hummed faintly within. Piece by piece he adjusted, tightened, and rewired until the device came to life. A soft light filled the chamber, and the crowd gasped. The final challenge was one of endurance. He was led into a vast arena where winds howled fiercely, carrying sand that stung the skin. He had to cross the expanse, guided only by faint markers that shifted with every gust. His legs burned, his throat ached, and every instinct told him to give up. But he thought of the Queen, of her steady gaze when she declared him her husband, of the faith she had placed in him. Step by step, he pressed forward until he stumbled across the finish. Exhausted but standing, he faced the watching crowd. Some in the court frowned, unwilling to admit his success, but others nodded, impressed despite themselves. Daniel had not conquered with strength or violence, but with the skills and resilience that had defined his life. The Queen stepped forward, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "You asked for proof. You have seen it with your own eyes." Daniel's chest heaved as he caught his breath, but when his gaze met hers, he saw pride in her eyes. For the first time, he felt that perhaps he was more than a guest or a burden. He was becoming a part of something larger. The trials did not silence all of the opposition, but they changed something important. Among the people, whispers shifted. Where once they had spoken of an outsider with suspicion, now they spoke of his calmness, his intelligence, his endurance. Some still doubted, but others began to wonder if the prophecy might truly be unfolding before their eyes. Daniel, meanwhile, found his life transforming. He no longer hid in the shadows of the palace. He was invited, reluctantly at first, into meetings where decisions were made. The Queen often asked his opinion, not on politics but on practical matters. When the palace's water system faltered, Daniel applied his engineering knowledge to repair it. When a group of farmers struggled with failing tools, he offered adjustments that improved their harvest. Slowly, small acts began to show that his presence brought benefit. The Queen remained unshaken in her decision. She never once apologized for naming him her husband. To her, it was not a mistake, but a truth she had embraced from the beginning. Her faith in him never wavered, even when the court grew restless. And as Daniel stood beside her, he felt that bond grow stronger. One evening, the city gathered in the grand square. The queen addressed her people, her voice carrying with power. When he came from the stars, many of you doubted. Some still do. But I see not a stranger. I see the one our prophecy spoke of. I see a partner who brings knowledge where we lacked, courage where we feared, and patience where we faltered. He is not only my husband by name, but by choice. The crowd was silent, the weight of her words heavy. Daniel stood at her side, unsure if he could ever live up to such trust. But, as he looked out at the faces before him, he realized something had changed. The eyes that once glared with hostility now studied him with curiosity, even with respect. Over time, acceptance grew. It was not immediate, nor was it perfect, but it was real. Daniel's role was not to replace their ways, but to bridge them. He shared ideas, solved problems, and stood firm against those who doubted. And through it all, the Queen remained his strongest ally, her declaration on that first day proving to be not a mistake of impulse, but the beginning of a bond rooted in conviction. For Daniel, the journey from lost engineer to chosen partner was more than survival. It was transformation. He had entered this world as a stranger, ready to flee at the first chance. But he stayed because the Queen had seen something in him that even he had not seen in himself. He knew his life would never return to what it had been. The workshop on Earth, the hum of machines, the routine of quiet days, all of it felt like a distant dream. Now his life was tied to hers, bound not by accident, but by choice, by trials, and by trust. And when he remembered that first moment, the Queen's eyes locking on him, her voice ringing across the hall declaring, "This is my husband," he no longer felt only shock. He felt pride, because those words had not been the end of his story, but the beginning of a new one.